Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. It's Carole Baskin, and
Howard Baskin.
And I know you have a lot of questions now that the Big Cat Public Safety Act passed. Oh my goodness. So Deb's been collecting a few of them, and we're going to try and answer them. Howie's going to answer them, because you'll get the right answers from Howie. What species of cats does this bill apply to?
It's the lions, tigers, jaguars,
leopards, and any hybrid there.
And importantly, the hybrids, because the hybrids used to be viewed as a way for these people to get around the laws. But in addition to our writing it specifically into our bill, recently in the last couple of years, PETA won a really important lawsuit where the court ruled that the hybrids were covered by the Endangered Species Act.
And some people might wonder why it does not apply to cheetah.
Well, I wonder.
So with anything, you do have to make compromises, and that seems to be the cat du jour for zoos to want to use. And so we had to give up cheetahs for this, but the good news is that almost no one has cheetah, and they are so fragile and so inbred that I don't think they're going to become popular in private possession. They would never be able to keep them alive long enough to do any kind of real interactions with them, and so it was something we had to give up in order to get this bill through. What does this bill mean for AZA zoos?
The only thing that the bill does for any USDA licensed exhibitor, and all AZA zoos are, is that they can't do cub petting, but the AZA zoos were not doing cub petting, so it doesn't have much effect on them at all.
What does the bill mean for these places that have ambassador animals, in big quotes, because none of those animals signed up for that? Columbus Zoo is the one that I understand they're specifically referring to, but there may be others.
There are one or two other AZA zoos that do that. It depends on the species. So Columbus Zoo is known for using cheetahs, which are not covered by the bill. But if they, in the case of any of the other large cats, if they were to take them off site, it means that the public has to be 15 feet from the animal if the animal is not enclosed in some kind of enclosure. Now, if they take them out and set up in a little temporary enclosure, they don't have to be 15 feet. But if the animal is like on a leash or something like that, it would have to be 15 feet from the public. And the purpose of that 15 feet rule that we put in the bill is to avoid the photo ops, because if we just made it you can't pet them or touch them, then what would happen is the keepers would hold the cat in front of the person to take a photo. So by having the cat 15 feet away, you can't get those close photos.
Will anyone still be allowed to breed tigers or other big cats in captivity?
Yes, there is no prohibition in our bill or in the other major federal legislation against breeding. So they can still breed. What our bill does is take away the incentive for this massive, constant speed breeding to generate cubs to use for petting. So the likelihood is that there will be very limited breeding, perhaps to supply, the licensed zoos, and then AZA will continue to do their breeding under the species survival plan.
Who's not allowed to breed?
There is no prohibition against. Oh, good.
Gotcha.
But private owners who do not have a USDA license will not be allowed to breed more cats or acquire more cats. So their existing cats are grandfathered in, but over the next decade or so, most of those will pass away.
Can anyone still pet a cub?
No.
Why can universities still have these cats in cages?
The exemption for universities was just one of those compromises you make in order to allow the bill to have a better chance of passing.
And how many universities do have big cats in cages? The hint is one.
One.
When does this bill take effect?
There is no language in the bill. Sometimes bills have language that say it takes effect for first of the year, or it takes effect so many months to give people time. There's no language like that in our bill, so I believe it takes effect immediately with respect to the cub petting, as soon as it's signed by the president. And then with respect to the private owners, they've been given 180 days to register their animals with the Fish and Wildlife Service.
And that answered the next question, 180 days for people to register. And they're registering with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, not USDA.
Correct.
And they're not going to be subject to inspections by USDA.
Correct, they're not.
What about pregnant cats at the time the law takes effect? What happens to those cubs?
There's no provision about that, but I would assume that if a cat in private hands is pregnant, that Fish and Wildlife Service is not going to take that cub or consider that to be a violation of the law if the cub was already if the owner's mother tiger or another big cat was already pregnant.
Although this is something I have seen over and over again where places claim that they rescued a pregnant cat and that's why they had cubs 3 years later. There is a thing called science, and they can figure out whether or not those cats were actually pregnant at the time that the bill passed, if it's more than that period of time. Can media, like TV, still use live or real big cats in shows and ads?
Well, the same 15-foot rule is going to apply. So we have, since the Conservation Game documentary came out about Jack Hanna and the younger proteges and their lies about where these animals come from and where they're going to, we have not seen any on TV. But if one were to bring one on TV, it's the same rule. They'd either have to be 15 feet away from the other people on the set or enclosed in some kind of barrier. And there would be no more of the handling.
What about social media? When people are showing off images on social media of like walking a tiger on a leash or taking the tiger to PetSmart or those kinds of things, will they be allowed to do that?
Well, I don't think, I'm guessing, but I don't think showing it on social media itself would be a violation, but it would be evidence that they were breaking the law somewhere if there were people within 15 feet when they were doing that. So they would be not very smart to do it because it would possibly, it would lead to enforcement if they were.
Are there any exemptions to whether or not people can handle or be close to these big cats?
I think we already addressed that. There are some exemptions to when people can handle the cats because, for instance, veterinarians need to be able to handle the cats, or I think there's one for transporting the cats, and there is a very specific one for dealing with the cubs that need care under the species survival plan.
Who will enforce and be watching at the local and state levels?
Well, there won't be any enforcement at the local and state levels. The enforcement agency that this is assigned to is the Fish and Wildlife Service, but what we're hoping to do is be very active, like we always have been, in reporting violations, and we'll be asking people around the country. One of the challenges here is we don't know where all these private owners are. So we will be publicizing and particularly asking supporters, people who are on our email list, to report to us anybody they know of that has a big cat of one of the qualifying species in their neighborhood, or that they hear about one anywhere else, and trying to help Fish and Wildlife Service identify them, notify them that they have to register, and then going forward, report to us if they know of someone who fits into that category of a private owner without a USDA license who actually does acquire another cat or breed any.
So the answer is it's you. It's going to be you and us. We're going to be watching, and we're going to be reporting, and we're going to be holding everybody's feet to the fire on this, because it took us forever to get this law enacted, and we are going to make sure that it has a lasting impact on saving these wild cats from abuse and saving them in the wild.
And the good news is here that enforcing this law should not be difficult or expensive for Fish and Wildlife Service. It doesn't require setting up a whole new department of people. It requires setting up a very simple database to keep a record when these people register, and they don't have to go out, as we said, and inspect. It will be based, like Fish and Wildlife Service's work now, on tips, on people reporting something that then has to be looked at, and these people are not going to be hard to find. It's not like you can you grab your tiger and go run off somewhere. It's hard to run with respect to the cub petting, it's hard to run a cub petting business that is economical without advertising it. It's hard to do it in a clandestine way, and so it seems highly unlikely that anybody is going to try to do that. But as soon as it became public and they got reported, it's a very simple thing to show up and, with whatever evidence you have, and say, where's this cub? So,
one of the things that I've just seen people with their hair on fire over, even people that are in the animal protection movement, is they're asking, what's going to happen to all these cats that everybody's going to relinquish as soon as this bill passes?
Well, the private owners have these cats because they want them. It gets them attention. They're not making money from them, and so if they're not exhibitors, so there's no big incentive for them to suddenly relinquish their cats. In fact, you could argue that now that other people can't get them and they can't get more, that they will be motivated to keep them. Now, there will still be, many of our rescues and the rescues of other sanctuaries are from people who get these cats as private owners, and then at some point decide they either can't take care of them or don't want to take care of them, or their family situations change due to a move or a divorce or a death in the family. So there's still going to be those, but there's no reason to think that there's going to be some huge influx of them.
And as you pointed out, most of the people who do get them do end up relinquishing them to sanctuaries already. So it's going to be like it's always been. It's just not going to continue year after year after year.
Yeah, there will be an end in sight.
Can private owners choose to sell their animals, or do they have to just relinquish them?
Well, selling endangered species, tigers were exempted from the normal prohibitions in the Endangered Species Act in 1998, but then through our work and the work of other organizations, we got that rule rescinded back in 2016. That's part of the reason Joe Exotic is in jail, is because after 2016, it again became illegal to sell a tiger. So you cannot legally sell a tiger. And if you try to get around the law by giving it away and taking cash, then if you're caught, you end up like Joe, because that's what he was doing.
And this is kind of a reiteration of something you've already said, but just for clarity's sake, who can and who cannot breed big cats?
The only people who cannot breed are the private owners who do not have a USDA license.
And what if a private owner decided they wanted to get a USDA license?
Well, they can apply. Hopefully, the USDA will not grant them a license and require that they demonstrate that they're going to be an exhibitor, and there are other requirements of having proper cages and things like caging and things like that. But one of the things that we've been very glad to see recently is, after years of the USDA being criticized for their rules being unclear and lax, they have in the last few years implemented some stronger rules about whether people can renew their license if they have outstanding violations and what happens when you have repeat violations. So, hopefully they will not have an incentive to just rubber stamp and grant licenses to all these people, although it has been something of an issue in the past.
And for people that don't understand, a USDA license is only supposed to be for those who are legitimate exhibitors or breeders of cats. And the private owners won't be able to be breeders, so they won't be able to be exhibitors unless they're going to be like open to the public and have public scrutiny.
Yeah,
and inspections from USDA.
Yeah, and one issue is there's not necessarily a detailed definition of what exhibitor is. What does that mean? Does that mean that if you invite your neighbor over to see the cat, you're an exhibitor? But hopefully they won't want to issue a whole bunch of new licenses, which then require them to be inspecting all these people.
Will the zoos still be able to trade and sell big cats?
Well, the big AZA zoos move cats around largely as a function of this species survival plan to use the genetic history to avoid inbreeding, and they do that by getting exemptions or exceptions from the Fish and Wildlife Service, which they should still be able to do.
And for the little nasty roadside zoos, I'm thinking, historically, they don't participate in any of the species survival plans. The only trading they typically did was to make sure everybody had enough cubs for cub petting, which they can't do. So what do you think is going to happen with them transferring cats back and forth?
Without the cub petting, there's not much incentive for them to be moving animals back and forth. I mean, you could envision some situation where one zoo loses their animal of a certain species and another one has more than they need of that species, and they know each other and do that, but it just doesn't seem like it's going to be anything like what was documented back in, I think, 2019 in National Geographic by Sharon Guynep, where she built this map around the country and was tracing all of these cubs going back and forth from Joe to Antle to all these other players.
And they're not allowed to sell those cats. They can only trade them or give them away.
Right.
If they're an endangered species.
Right.
So what can people do to help with this now that we have ended the cub handling and phased out the private ownership of big cats?
Well, the remaining task is to find all these private owners and continue to report any cub petting, any contact, anytime you go somewhere where you see them exhibiting cubs or adults without barriers, or where people are getting close to them, people are touching them, let us know so that we can. What we're hoping to do is develop a good working relationship with the Fish and Wildlife Service to help them enforce the law.
And the last question on here is what's next? And so I know a lot of you are thinking, well, now we need to go after the trophy hunters and now we need to go after the circuses. And I personally think this is going to do away with the circuses because they can't use those animals typically once they become adults. And so they need that constant supply of the cubs that are cast off from the cub petting to be able to even have cats that they can handle in their acts. So I think that's going away. And of course, we want to work more on the protections in the wild. Do you want to talk more about that?
Well, we have made a point in recent years, as our finances allowed, to kind of what like tithing. We have taken a portion of our revenue each year and donated it to projects working with animals, with the big cats and the small cats. We refer them all as big cats, but many of the smaller species don't get the attention that the bigger big cats get, and so we've focused more of our energy there, working with a fellow who is really the world's leading smaller big cat expert, Jim Sanderson, on projects where they're trying to do things like reduce the amount of of human predator conflict where the cats are stealing chickens or goats, and to work with the people to prevent that so that we don't have these retaliatory killings, things like that. And so what we're hoping to do is put more both dollars and energy into those projects, saving these animals in the wild from extinction.
Where they belong. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I'm done. If you have other questions, send them to us. We'll do our best to answer them. If we find out that something we've answered today, we're doing our best to answer these, but if we find out something we've said here today isn't accurate, we'll try to correct it. And if we don't know the answer to a question you ask, then we'll try to find out the answer.